Saturday that really didn't feel like a win. Purdue wins 68-64 over Oregon, a game where Purdue was favored by 20 points against an Oregon team that frankly had really struggled in the weeks leading up to it. Nate Biddle did come back for Oregon. The Ducks got a big boost with him coming back, but regardless of how the outcome went, I wanted to bring on one of the better basketball minds I know, Jeff Schoenle. He's been around the Purdue program for quite some time now. I'll let him introduce himself, but I've got him on the show here today. We're going to talk about the Oregon game. We're going to talk about Purdue's slump here, some of the struggles Purdue has had since the turn of the calendar, where Purdue goes from here, and all of that. So without further ado, here's my interview with Jeff. All right, I am pleased to be joined today by Jeff Schoenle, one of the better basketball minds that I know, one of the guys that I go to when I want to learn more about the X's and O's of the games and all of that. Jeff, kind of tell the audience about your background, about your connections with Purdue, and why you are one of the better basketball minds that I know.
Well, first of all, Jordan, thank you for having me. I guess that's probably going to say more about the people you know if I'm one of the better basketball minds. But after high school, I went to Purdue, had a chance to work for the basketball program about 20 years ago under Gene Cady and Matt Painter. Just learned so much from those guys as well as the assistants there at the time: Conzo Martin, Todd Foster, Paul Lusk, Jay Price, Tracy Webster, just to name a few of the guys that were there. Just an incredible learning experience for me, seeing how those guys operate day in, day out, and kind of being behind the scenes of a Big Ten basketball program. After that, finished up my undergrad, stayed at Purdue to get my master's, coached 3 years of high school basketball in and around the Lafayette area. Went after finished grad school, coached 3 years of really high level prep school basketball, 2 years in Maine in the NEPSAC, which at the time was the best high school basketball league in the country. Um, Got a chance to coach against, numerous guys who made careers in the NBA, dozens more who played professionally overseas, um, guys who people would recognize from college basketball, and won a championship up there. Spent a year at a prep school in Virginia, a military school, kind of along lines of Hargrave, Fork Union, that area. Then spent a year coaching Division II basketball. Um, did that. Some family things came up that had to move back home and take care of some family things for both my family and my wife's family. So got out of coaching, but stayed in it through, coached a few years in the Indiana Elite program. Now trying to coach my son a little bit. It's in a elementary, middle school basketball, trying to get him to become a player. It's sometimes a little bit frustrating having to go from being used to coaching, college level, high level talent to, trying to coach fourth, fifth, sixth graders. It's definitely an adjustment, but just being around the game, I love the game, love what it brings. I think it's the ultimate combination of, you know, individual sports and just team sports. You have individual greatness, but you have to be able to um, constrain that in a team environment. It's there are instances where one player can and does win games by themselves or almost by themselves, but you still have a team construct in around it. So I think it's kind of the best of both worlds with team sports and then individual sports as well, because basketball is one of the few sports you can get better at by yourself in solitude. I think that's something that's maybe you don't see at some of the other team sport aspects.
So we won't bury the lead here as it comes to basketball and Purdue's team this year. We were both inside Mackey Arena yesterday. Purdue survives 68-64 over Oregon. There's the saying in the coaching world and certainly in the college basketball world that there's no such thing as a bad win, especially in conference play. But if there is such a thing, that was probably what Purdue got yesterday, with a win over a not very good Oregon team that's won just one Big Ten game. Purdue was a 20-point favorite. Uh, Needs a big Fletcher Lawyer three to pull away there. What did you see yesterday from your vantage point at Mackey Arena that really made that game more interesting than Purdue fans wanted it to be?
I think you saw a team that got a boost from one of their leaders coming back, and Nate Biddle, who um, is when healthy and at the top of his game, one of the better players in the conference. He had been out for that was his first game since the calendar turned. I think he'd missed close to 2 months of action with a foot injury, and you see a team that kind of got reinvigorated and re-energized by their leader, their star coming back in, and obviously Nate Biddle had an incredible performance yesterday, 23 points in his first game back. Drew 11 fouls, was 10 of 14 from the free throw line, just 1 of 8 from three. Thankfully for Purdue, I was there. I got into the arena probably about an hour and 20 minutes before tip off, and just watching him go around in pregame warmups and was shooting, I would venture to guess probably hit 90% of the threes. My eyes were just glued to him, just trying to see, was he moving well? Was he going full speed or warm up speed before a game? And, how did he look? And the stroke has not left Nate Biddle, at least in warmups. Didn't translate to the game, but he presents such a interesting matchup, being that he's a 7-footer that primarily wants to step out and shoot threes. It's a little bit different than, the matchup that Purdue had just the game before against Maryland, where you saw Solomon Washington just, I'm dribbling with my right hand. I'm going to throw my shoulder into the chest of whoever's guarding me and try to bum rush them on the way to the rim. Just a completely different matchup. And you do have to wonder, um, not saying that Purdue wasn't thinking that this was a possibility, but what's the last game film you have of what Oregon's doing with Nate Biddle on the floor? You haven't played with him, so it's almost like you have two different scouts. You have to say, okay, here's what Oregon's going to do if they don't have Nate Biddle. This is what they've done for the last 6, 7, 8 weeks. And then you have to go back to, you know, Thanksgiving, early December to see, okay, here's what Oregon's doing with Nate Biddle. And, teams in college basketball are living, breathing organisms that change throughout the course of the year. And you've seen that with Purdue throughout, past seasons where there's they take on one style, they can morph based on how things go, how they're playing, how different individuals are playing. Are there new wrinkles that Purdue hadn't seen yet that they brought out with Nate Biddle? And part of the reason that Nate Biddle is so successful is Nate Biddle hasn't gotten beaten down by the course of the Big Ten grind. He's fairly fresh, as fresh as you could hope to be, the first weekend in February. So, and he's going to want to make a statement that he's back, he's ready to go, and I think you saw that in the energy that he came out with.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself there. At the end of the day, or early on, and I was, with some buddies out in the concourse at halftime, and Purdue ended the first half just on a terrible stretch defensively, and that's become a trend. But at the end of the game, Purdue gives up a flat 1.0 points per possession, gets 7 straight stops down the stretch. Defensively, Purdue is what it is, but the offense did not have a great day yesterday. What kind of stood out from a Purdue perspective, on both sides of the floor, really contributing to what was a really unremarkable performance?
Yeah, and you look, obviously, if you take out the 93 they had against Maryland last weekend, last Sunday, this isn't a team that's been, threatening scoreboard operators, sensibilities here. They've been in the 60s to upper 70s really in the last 3 weeks. And when I was on the drive coming from Fort Wayne to the game yesterday, I was listening to Big Ten Radio on Sirius XM, and they had Ben McCollum on. And one of the questions they asked Ben McCollum was, you came in known as this slow, deliberate, methodical offense. But they were talking about Iowa had just played at Oregon. That was Oregon's previous game, and Iowa put up 84. And it's the Ben McCollum was asked, how do you reconcile, getting up these 84 points, but being thought of as slow and methodical? And he made a really interesting point. He said there's two things: there's tempo and pace, and a lot of people confuse the two or think they're the same thing, and they're really not. And that's where I think Purdue is. Tempo is how many possessions you get and how fast the game is up and down. Pace is how hard you're cutting, how quickly the ball's moving, how how definitive your actions are, your screening actions, your cutting actions. I'm not sure if Purdue's pace is exactly where Matt Painter wants it to be right now offensively. Um, and part of that is you do have one of, if not the best point guards in the country. You want to give him every chance to explore the defense and, find cracks, find crevices, find openings for teammates. So the ball's naturally going to stick in his hands, and rightfully so. Braden Smith has earned that right with his play over the last 3.5 plus years. Trey Kaufman-Renz earned the right to, back down into post ups because he's shown he's effective that way. I do wonder if Purdue's pace in the half court um, could be better. It is and really is where Matt Painter wants it to be right now in terms of ball movement, decision making, how quickly those things are being done to take advantage of defenses. When was the last time you really thought Purdue had an opponent in scramble mode defensively, throughout the course of a game? I don't think anybody, is under the impression that Purdue's going to play like Alabama does. And, we're going to get up and down. We're going to put up 53s a game or whatever it is. But half court wise, you have intelligent basketball players, you have skilled basketball players, and it seems like the defenses are setting the tone for Purdue's offense instead of vice versa. So that's one thing I think in this last, probably since the Iowa game, maybe, certainly since USC, where I'm just not sure the offense is as crisp as maybe Matt Painter would want it to be right now.
One of the things, and I talked about this on last week's episode, and I know you and I have talked about this. Trey Kaufman-Ren's a bit of an enigma because he's a really good player. He's a really effective scorer, but he requires a lot of space to do so. And when he's playing the four alongside Oscar Clough and Daniel Jacobson, it's harder for that space to come about for him. But Purdue's roster is not built for him to play at the five. What have you noticed this year with him? Obviously, the statistics aren't what they were last year, but also the role is a little bit different. What have you kind of noticed just from Purdue with Trey Kaufman-Renn and the front court as a whole?
Yeah, it seems like they're getting him the ball in the middle of the lane at the free throw line a lot less than they did last year. And I think Purdue's offense last year was even more predictable than it was this year, just because, hey, stop our two-man game. You know, stop this. You had Braden Smith wheeling and dealing, you had Trey Kaufman-Renn, and now it seems like they're getting him some more actions on the side pick and rolls, getting him into that 12, 15-foot baseline short wing area instead of the middle of the floor. And I think that's partly um, Clough and Jacobson as, in the dunker spot, weak side. So if defenders do stay with TKR on that roll or switch it, you have Braden turning the corner into the lane, and he's got to dump off either direction. So I do think some of that is by design. One thing that I've noticed with Trey is the ball can stick a little bit with him on his back downs. And not saying that these two are the exact same player, but one thing I always loved about watching Caleb Swanigan is the ball didn't always stick with him in the post when he probably could have. He was so good at taking a couple dribbles, realizing, oh, it's not there, kicking it back out to somebody like Vince or PJ or Dakota or whoever he was playing with. And then he would go and just bury the dude again. Like, okay, I didn't get it this time. You're not stopping me now. He'd throw it out to PJ or Dakota, and that ball was coming right back into him. And he would get 2 or 3 feet extra position just by getting it out and burying somebody, and then the ball's coming right back into him. I'd like to see TKR work that into his game a little bit. Like, hey, let's get the ball out. Let's reestablish our position. Let's make the defender have to foul me, have to make a mistake, have to lunge for a pass. Um, I think, there was, I think, a turnover yesterday. I want to say it was late where Trey caught it on the wing, took one dribble and immediately picked it up. Ended up having to bail out to CJ, and CJ had to try and create something with 4 seconds left on the shot clock. And ended up being a turnover. I think he lost his dribble, and it was a tie up or a shot clock violation. But that's the situation where you give Trey the ball with 11, 12 seconds on the shot clock. The decision's got to be made by 9 seconds on the shot clock, not by 4 or 5 seconds left. Because then there's nothing anybody else is going to be able to do. There's not a Carson Edwards on this team that you can give him the ball with 3 seconds on the shot clock and say, "Hey, buddy, have at it," and get up a reasonable shot. There's not somebody that can do that on this roster. So I just would like to see the ball not stick as much, but he's also proven, throughout the last 2.5 years or so that he's going to be able to score on almost anybody he goes up against. And we talked about this yesterday when we were texting after the game. You know, there's a gift and a curse in that because you're going to force some stuff because that's what you do when you're a gifted scorer. Like every good scorer that Purdue's ever had has taken bad shots and has held on to the ball too long. It's not a Trey Kaufman Rent issue at all. Um, but the fine line you have to walk is when do I go? When do I get rid of it? And do I know that, hey, I'm going to get it back? Because if you don't think you're going to get it back, you're probably not going to give it up in the first place. That's just what it is. And Trey scored, you know, plenty of points at Purdue to be able to know that, hey, I'm a go-to option. He's obviously a very confident player. Um, I can score on anybody. He went right at Nate Biddle down the crunch time, was a big reason, that Purdue was able to stay with them, Oregon, until that late game ending run that Purdue came back and ultimately won the game with. But at the same time, it's hard. There's no simple answer to looking at a single play by itself and say, hey, that's a bad play. You know, that happens. Nobody's out there thinking, yeah, I'm going to come down this possession, I'm going to dribble it 15 times and then throw it out to somebody with 2 seconds on the shot clock. It's going to be a turnover. That's anybody's intention. Um, I just wish that the ball would move and Fletcher's smart, Braden's smart. They know that if he reestablished position, hey, let's bury the guy and we'll get it back to you. And that's something I just wish a little wrinkle that we'd see a little bit more from Trey.
Purdue as a whole has taken care of the basketball, and yesterday it didn't. That was part of the issue with 14 turnovers. But what I guess this Purdue team has major aspirations. The team has not shied away from that. But over the past month, really ever since that win at Wisconsin, Purdue hasn't looked the part of a team that's really a national title contender. Where are you at in terms of the proverbial panic button in terms of what Purdue is really capable of on a large scale this year?
Um, I I'll go out and I'll be honest with you. I didn't really. buy into, I guess, the national title or bust mindset. First of all, that's not how I think as a person, a fan, or an ex-coach. Um, winning is hard. Winning is hard. What Matt Painter and Purdue have been able to accomplish over the last 10, 12 years since, they had the slide where they finished dead last in the Big Ten 2 years in a row. What they've like that's hard. That's You don't do that by accident. Um, and this team, while very talented, they don't have somebody that can just take your defensive game plan and go, yeah, that's not going to work. They don't have a Zach Edey where you're just like, yeah, you're thinking about doubling me. I'm going to go through both of those guys and score, or I'm going to foul out both of those guys. So whatever you had planned, it's not going to work. You know, they don't have a Caleb Swanigan who looks at the person across from him at the center tip and wants to kill them for 40 minutes. Like wants to embarrass them and like, oh, you said this guy was a good rebounder. I'm going to go out and get 19 rebounds today and he's going to get 3. Like they don't have that. They don't have a Carson Edwards who you can say, hey, we got to contain them. We got to contest his jumpers. And he just makes 6 threes with a hand in his face. They don't have a Jaden Ivey who you're like, yeah, we got to keep him out of transition. And then by the time you say, hey, let's stop him, he's already dunking the ball at the other end. Like Jaden Ivey wasn't a very good ball handler with his left hand. It didn't matter. He was going by you with his right hand. Like this team doesn't have somebody who can really just take your game plan and throw it out the window. It's not to say they aren't good. They're 19-4 for a reason. They're ranked in the top 15 for a reason. As Al Davis famously quipped, just win, baby. And that's, you can talk about bad wins all you want. At the end of the day, they added a tally in the left-hand column, not the right-hand column yesterday. So it's like my dad used to tell me about golf. They don't ask how, they just ask how many. Like, as long as you scored more points than them at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you won 95-94 or 68-64. You won. It may not look pretty, but I bet you Oregon's not pleased with some of the things they did yesterday. That's basketball. So I'm not on the panic button yet. You look at their 3-game losing streak. They had a very, very realistic and good chance to win the UCLA game and just had a couple breakdowns offensively and defensively. They withstood, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, the performance of the year so far in college basketball, not just in the Big Ten, but nationally, with Keaton Wagler coming into Mackey as a freshman and dropping 46. And you were right there at the end of that game. I don't think anything Illinois did defensively rattled Purdue in that game. You adjusted defensively to take away Keaton Wagler, and other guys made shots at the end. You can't take away everything defensively. Not against high level coaching like you have in the Big Ten, not against high level talent that you have in the Big Ten. You're going to give up something. Now, you can pick what you're going to give up. You can pick, hey, I want, Andrei Stojakovic to shoot threes or David Miricic to shoot threes. Okay, then you got to live with that result. And if they make shots, they make shots. If they miss them, they miss them. It's the strategy of, is this the best thing that we could ask for defensively? And at the end of the day, you just got to do whatever you can. What's frustrating about Purdue defensively, and I don't think defense is as much of the issue as offense with Purdue right now. They've been holding teams in the 60s, and you got to think if you're giving up 65 points a game in conference, you're going to put yourself in a position to win a lot of games. Doing that. The frustrating thing is it's the mental lapses, it's the communication, it's the nonsensical decisions that are being made where it's like, hey, just stay solid. You hear Matt Painter talk about in interviews and press conferences. We just want you to be solid. We don't need you to make decisions on the fly. If you just do what we're asking you to do, we will live with the result. Um, I I remember not to throw this person under the bus, but back several years ago, hearing about uh, Purdue going through shoot arounds, and they had a guard, and I won't mention his name so I don't throw him under the bus, but saying, "Hey, we went through guarding their defensive actions how we wanted to do it, and then we had to stop and go through guarding their defensive actions a different way because we knew the person on our team wasn't going to do it the way we asked, and he was going to break down. So we had to go and walk through two different ways. Like, okay, this is how we want to do it. But when this doesn't happen, here's what we're going to do when it doesn't happen, which you can't have that. And there's there seems to be communication issues defensively. We saw that yesterday with some botched switches. Oregon got a few layups and dunks at the rim where guys just didn't switch properly, didn't communicate the switch, didn't communicate, talking guys off away from the ball, and left guys open at the rim. That's going to happen at times, but you're hoping it doesn't happen as frequently as it seems like it's happened. The defensive breakdowns, the communication breakdowns that we've seen, the last 2, 3 weeks with Purdue.
I think I know exactly who you're referring to there because I've heard a very similar story. But no, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. As we kind of look ahead here, this is a massive stretch for Purdue at Nebraska, at Iowa. Then you come home from Michigan, Indiana, Michigan State, go to Ohio State, not a walk in the park. This is a huge stretch that, uh, yes, exactly. He just showed me the guy who that was. But what do you see as the area where Purdue has to improve, if at all, if it wants to have a stretch here where it solidifies itself as a top two, top three seed, as a team that is in the mix in the Big Ten here as we go into the home stretch?
I think offensively you have to get people on the back heel defensively. You have to dictate the pace of play in the half court. You have to dictate how people are going to go about guarding you. I think that's something where, you know, there's there is something to be said about taking what the defense gives you, but there's also something to be said about making the defense give you what you want. And that comes with being aggressive and the pace you play within the half court. Also, I think one thing that's happened, and I'm looking at the lovely sportsreference.com right now. You look at Purdue and their ability to steal points. You always talk about, hear coaches talk about being able to steal points. Looking at their stats nationally, they are 324th in free throw attempts per game. So they're not getting to the line a ton. They are 302nd in steals per game at 5.7, and they're 273rd in the country at 2.8 blocks per game. What do steals and blocks get you? Chances for runouts, chances for fast break points, points in transition. What do free throws get you? The ability to get points at the free throw line is the most efficient place on the basketball court to score. You know, those are things that Purdue's not doing in bulk, in mass, right now to steal easy points. And it does put a lot of pressure on your half court offense to be extremely efficient. Thankfully, Purdue has that. They're 13th in the country in field goal percentage, they're 17th in the country in 3-point percentage. And I think Purdue fans have seen they haven't shot the ball well for the better part of the last month. Maryland notwithstanding, it's been, Fletcher Lawyer has obviously had his struggles that have been talked about. CJ Cox hasn't shot it at the level that I think he expects to or can. Omer Meyer and Jakari Harris off the bench have been up and down as shooters. And Jack Benter's, I think 6 for 24 in Big Ten play. So he's he's certainly capable. Obviously, we've seen what he did against Kent State and Auburn, but This is a team that has to rely on making shots to open up stuff for TKR in the post, to open up the pick and roll game. Because if you're, shooting 31% from three, your man's going to take two extra steps into the lane towards the Trey Kaufman and Braden Smith pick and roll. And that space that you had to make the pocket pass or to get to the rim or to get to your dump off or lob pass to Oscar Clough or DJ, that space isn't there anymore because defenses aren't respecting the three as much as they have in the past when Purdue has been on their shooting tears. Now, the good news is Purdue has shown that they can go on these shooting tears where they get hot and they reel off, 15, 16 threes in a game. They're certainly capable of that. But until you have defenses being forced to respect that and guard you in their scouting report saying, "Hey, we can't give this person any space. You have to be there on the catch with a high hand." It's it's going to constrict the other parts of the offense.
I guess I'll close with this, Jeff. That's good stuff. We're 23 games into the year. Purdue came into this year as one of the most known commodities in the country from a personnel, from a fit perspective. What, if anything, has surprised you that we've seen through the first 23 games of this season?
I think I think just the mental lapses, the the silly fouls, the breakdowns in coverages, the lackadaisical decisions with the ball. Um, I feel I feel like this is going to be sacrilegious for me to say this on a Purdue themed podcast, but Bob Knight wasn't pulling your leg when he said mental is to physical is 4-1. Like that wasn't that wasn't a throwaway comment. He's right about that. And to have the mental breakdowns and the mental lapses at, as you put out, key points in the game, turnovers late and turnovers at the end of the first half and defensive breakdowns at the end of halves have just killed Purdue. To see that happen is frustrating from a team that has the aggregate number of minutes played that they have, the number of moments, the number of wins, the number of big games they played in. It's frustrating. And yes, mistakes are going to happen. Basketball is not a game of perfection. There are going to be mistakes, and you have to prove that you can overcome those mistakes. You hear Matt Painter talk about, well, what are you going to do if the ball doesn't go in? Like you have to figure out a way to win. And give credit to Purdue yesterday. The ball didn't go in. They shot 5 of, I think, 18 from three. Um, Missed a couple front ends of one and ones that could have cost them. They were down late and they got 7 straight stops to end the game and ended up winning. Now, if that didn't happen, what is the pulse of the fan base and even the locker room today if you lose at home to one of the certainly lower tier. I'm not going to say they're the worst team in the Big Ten, but they're not going to win the Big Ten either in Oregon. Um, what is the thought behind that? What does that do to the confidence level of the team? What does that do to their psyche? Um, and how they move forward. Like you said, they've got a tough stretch here. They're going to in a Nebraska team that I think is one of the better defensive teams in the Big Ten. Certainly very efficient offensively. They cause you a lot of problems. Um, they went toe to toe with Michigan without arguably their best player in Rink Mast at Michigan. They beat Illinois at Illinois. Now, granted, that was 2 months ago, and Illinois has since come back to beat them. But this Nebraska team is very good. Purdue hasn't always played well in Lincoln. And then you go to an Iowa team that is 17-5 right now as we're recording this. I'm watching them play. They're down 5 against Northwestern towards the end of the first half, but this is an Iowa team that gave you everything you wanted at Mackey, and, and then you have a 3 game stretch at home, 3 home games that really I think are going to define how people remember this season. You have Michigan at home, a team that on any given day looks at and probably could make a legitimate claim to being the best team in the country. You have IU at home on a Friday night. Mackey should just be a powder keg. And you're playing a team that really just kind of punked you in Bloomington. To be completely honest. They came out, they punched you in the mouth, and they kept swinging. And you were lucky to get back into that game. I don't want to say lucky, but you got back into it, but it wasn't enough, and you dug yourself too deep of a hole to get out of. And then you got a Michigan State team that, man, I was watching their game against Illinois last night. That was a hell of a basketball game. And you saw both of those teams. I mean, that was a street fight, in some senses, a literal one. But a Tom Izzo team coming down the stretch is not going to back down from anybody or anything. So you've got those, I don't want to call them like legacy defining games, but if you want to make sure that all of your goals and aspirations as a team are still available, you've got to go 3-0 in those home games. It's got to start clicking. Um, like I said, I think they're okay defensively. There's been breakdowns. You're going to have that, but offensively, you'd like to see them get back to the pace that they can play at. You have smart, intelligent, experienced, skilled basketball players. Let's see if they can get defenses on their heels because you look at two of those three teams, certainly in Michigan and Michigan State, they control games defensively. They dictate how the games are going to be played with their defense. IU, not so much. Um, but IU causes all sorts of problems with their shooting and playmaking on offense. So that's, I think, really a defining 3 game stretch for not just this season, but how these seniors are going to be remembered, and you can look at they're still uh they've still only got 3 losses in conference. You're seeing something where, it's crazy to think that the team who wins the Big Ten might have 2 or 3 losses in a 20-game season with how rugged the Big Ten is. Michigan's 12-1 right now. Illinois and Nebraska have 2 losses. Michigan State and Purdue have 3. Teams are going to lose, but you have to make sure you're getting the teams that are your level or ahead of you in the standings. Um, and you've got, Michigan State, Nebraska, and Michigan all coming up here in the next couple weeks. Three teams, throw IU in there as a rivalry game. You know, if you have any aspirations of trying to get back in at the top level of this Big Ten title game, those are the games you got to win. Um, you've got to make sure you take care of business at Ohio State. You've got to make sure that you take care of your business at Iowa. 2 teams that have proven, Ohio State has beaten Purdue. When Purdue's had the better team, Ohio State's come out and beat them. Iowa, like I said, new with Ben McCollum this year, they've proven that they can, play with you, and that game's going to be in Iowa City. So it's really kind of put up or shut up time for the Boilermakers in terms of your goals, and you want to be crescendoing and peaking at this time of the year. This is when, the practices aren't long. You're getting your rest, you're staying off your legs. It's mental reps more than anything right now. Are you sharp mentally down the stretch leading into the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament? And that's what I think you'd want to see with your Matt Painter and his staff is how mentally sharp are we? How detail oriented and assignment focused are we coming down the stretch? Because I think that's been his frustration. You saw it more so in the IU game, about the effort, but you watch him on the sidelines in the games and defensive break, and he's just throwing up his hands. He had did that a couple times yesterday. We slapped the scores table. That's a sign if you're watching the game that that wasn't their plan. You know, you listen to Mick Cronin's post game press conference after they lost to IU at home, And the out of bounds play that IU got at the end, I think they got a big play late. Mick was saying we walked through that play 5 times, an out of bounds play, 5 times the day before the game. We watched that play 5 times in film the night before. In shoot around the next day, we walked through that out of bounds play 5 times. That's 15 times in an 18-hour period, probably, yeah, probably a 18-hour period that you've went over this play. I need you to remember what to do 6 hours after shoot around when we're playing. And it didn't happen. That's what's frustrating as a coach when you know, Matt Painter and his staff aren't just showing up, rolling the ball out and going, hey, and the pregame 10 minutes for, hey, let's do this against, you know, let's do this against Nate Biddle. Let's do this against Bennett Sturts. Let's do this against Lamar Wilkerson. These are crafted game plans that are gone over several times. And to see just the mental lapses, you can tell it's very frustrating for him and I assume the rest of the coaching staff.
Jeff, that's awesome, man. Really good insight, really good commentary there. I appreciate you coming on today. Any parting thoughts here?
I think I think my only parting thought is for, people who obviously Purdue fans are listening to this is, winning is hard. And to see what this program has done over, Matt Painter's tenure and really, the last 5 or 6 years, this is it, don't take it for granted because when I was part of the Purdue basketball program, I'll tell a little story here. My freshman year, Purdue made it to the NCAA tournament, and they played in Birmingham. That was when they blew out LSU, the Melvin Buckley game, and then they played Texas in the second round when they had TJ Ford, and lost to a number one seed Texas team in a I think it was 9 or 10 point game. And obviously being part of the program, they're like, "Hey, do you want to come down and go to the game in Birmingham?" And my 18-year-old self at the time was like, "No, we'll be back. I don't want to drive all the way down to Birmingham for a game. Like we'll be in the NCAA tournament again. I'll just go to those games when I'm older, the next 2, 3 years." The next year, lost to Notre Dame in the first round of the NIT in South Bend, and I was at that game. And then the next 2 years, we won 16 games total. Purdue's got a chance to win 16 games in conference this season. That's how many games we won my last 2 years as part of the program. So, um, and I'll end on this. There's a meme, I guess, that I printed out and put in a frame on my son's bedroom wall, and it's got these two booths, like it's black and white drawing, like cartoon drawing. It's got these two booths. Over one booth says, um, "Interested in winning," and there's a line of people just lined up going to the booth, interested in winning. The other sign is interested in doing what winning requires. And there's one dude in that line. Everybody wants to win. There's not a person on this basketball team that's not doing everything in their power. They want to win every single game, but doing what's required of winning isn't always fun, isn't always sexy, isn't it's boring, tedious, monotonous work. And that's why you see Matt Painter harp on these things like just do your job. We don't need you to be flashy. We don't need you to do anything other than what we're asking you to do. And when Purdue does that, they can be a very, very, very good team. You saw them carry out that assignment when they blew out Texas Tech in the Bahamas. You saw them, take it to a talented Auburn team in Indianapolis. You know, they went up to Wisconsin, and granted, this isn't, the Frank Kaminsky, Sam Decker Wisconsin teams, but Wisconsin's not a bad basketball team. And they were up, I think, close to 25 in the second half. People don't do that at the Kohl Center. So it's there. Um, I think that's just the one thing is understanding that what winning requires is hard. And it's a very tedious, monotonous process, and it doesn't always turn out in your favor. But being, as Matt Painter says, process based, working towards that and trying to focus and, the mental reps more than anything, understanding what it takes to get this Purdue team back to, the level that they aspire to be to, and seeing what this group, this incredibly talented and successful senior class, seeing what they can do to make sure they end, their season and their careers on a positive note for Purdue.
Good stuff there and some really good perspective. It is a much different program than it was 2 decades ago when Matt Painter was just getting started. But
Mhm.
Jeff, I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on today, and we'll have to do this again here after the season with a little post-mortem reflection.
Hey, sounds good. I appreciate you having me, Jordan.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, that was my interview with Jeff Schoenle. I appreciate his time. It's a huge week for Purdue here. Purdue has to go to Nebraska, go to Iowa, and find a way to get these wins. They are, as Jeff kind of said, this next 5-game stretch is going to define an awful lot. So we'll be back here next week after Purdue's trips out to Corn Country. Until then, enjoy the games, guys. Be safe. Take care out there. I'll talk to you next time. Take care.